Welcome, everyone. So, I'm Erin. We're going to interview Ariya Lorenz, this beautiful angel of a soul who worked with us, worked with us at the Ananda Village School and lived nearby with her family for a little while and miraculously ended up in my classroom of all places. I needed assistance. I had three students with some challenges, learning challenges, and were just needing some extra support. And I was looking for someone, and I thought, that Aria, I've met her. She's pretty good. I think I'll ask her. And it ended up being just a perfect match. And you brought so much to our school, and I learned so much from you. And we've
Oh,
continued to learn. No, it's true. And all of us, we've invited her to come to some of our staff meetings and give us training because well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background in OT and occupational therapy and what that is.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Erin, for having me here, and everybody. I appreciate the trust you have in what comes through me, and I have the same trust in where it's coming from. Not so much in myself, maybe, but definitely in the source from where this all comes. So I hope I can be a good and clear channel to let it all through. Yeah, and where it's coming from is I used to work as an occupational therapist in a practice with children in Germany for 5 years or so, and um, the I was specialized in sensoric integration, which is a lady by the name of Jane Ayers. She developed. Oops. 1 second, I gotta take the dog out.
Oh, the dog. Oh boy. Well, we had to have at least one dog at the conference.
Can somebody take Jules? Thank you. So here, by the way, you're hearing my whole background. The timing is such that my son Adhd, who's been with the COVID situation alone for the whole time, always around adults, he has finally two of his playmates visiting and a dog and the whole family, and it's happening right now.
Oh my goodness.
And so they're of course playing in the pool.
Yes, of
I'm
course.
thinking, had I orchestrated it, I needed children's background noises
Yes,
in the pool
yes.
while it's raining. It would not have happened, but
Oh well, that's okay.
this time it happened. So I hope this works.
Yeah, so you
Anyway,
were saying you worked in occupational therapy in Germany for a few
yeah,
years.
I did. And what happened is I was specialized in the sensorical integration therapy because I really felt in tune with that. And with the sensory integration therapy, there is a component that really brings solutions and keys to lots of the questions that parents have: ADD, attention problems, emotional problems, physical problems, how kids walk or how they behave, and also in self-esteem. And lots of these issues that the parents would come or the children would come with, I could backtrack to the way the brain interprets information that's coming in from the world and then creates an output. And
Mm,
when that is a beautiful dance, like a beautiful symphony where the person is hearing the music well, and then they're understanding what they need to do, and then they play the instrument well, you get a wonderful melody. And if it's not good, the melody hurts so much that nobody can stand it, you know? And that's kind of the experience some kids have, that they're really having a real tremendous difficulty in some areas, and the parents are suffering from it. And it's actually a real easy fix often, or
mm,
a real easy approach
mhm.
to helping the brain to get better. So that's what I've been working with. And then I developed, a healing practice with divine healing that's just coming through me from, God, and just helping to bring real harmony back to the immune system and the energy system. And with that came this understanding that I can actually access my higher self and talk directly to it and ask questions. And that's from where I am now working nowadays. I'm not anymore working from any knowledge that I really
Mm,
have. That's kind of the background, but it's really that I'm just tuning into the higher stuff like we all do when
mm,
we're really, in school with the kids. We are getting that information from the higher realms and we're
absolutely.
tuning into what God wants to have happen.
Yeah.
And we're using the tools that we have, that we learned, in the way that we can bring that out.
Yeah, it was like
And
Gina
that's,
was talking about last night, just like speaking the language of energy. We just have to learn, we have to learn that language, help our children learn that language, and we can all work with that and work with the energy. It's really beautiful. I had a
yeah.
question. Let's see, I might have lost it. Oh, I know. I wanted to say if anybody is listening, or those of you that are listening live, especially, if there's some behavior or some issue that you've had with a student or in the classroom that you're just like, do you have any insight into this? What might this be? Because that is what I really gained from you, was like just being able to shift the perspective of what is going on for a student in, I'm seeing this behavior that's really not working in the classroom or really just not working for that student's growth, and just how to understand it from a different perspective, like what's happening in the brain, how is integration. You talked a little bit about, maybe you can talk a little more about that cycle of input and integration and output, and just how that, just kind of an overview so people understand that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Thank you. Yeah, so the way we look at the brain and at basically the behavior is we look at it, you could compare it to an apple tree. So you basically have an apple tree, and the apple tree has roots, and through the roots, it absorbs nutrition, right? So the nutrition goes into the tree, and it then creates a good tree. It creates healthy branches and healthy structure, right? And so the structure could be compared to really the whole brain, the neurons, and the whole communication inside the brain. Yeah. And then if all of that works well, then the tree creates beautiful apples that we all get to enjoy. Now, the apples you can compare to either movement,
Mhm.
yeah, and how we move our bodies, and how we can handle our bodies and our equilibrium, or also to how we feel, how we talk, how we listen, how we basically respond to the world. Okay, so the roots are how we perceive, how we receive the world. And then the tree itself is how we process that and integrate it and how we make sense of it.
Mhm.
And then the apples are really the output,
Beautiful.
the way we interact with the world because of the experiences, right?
Hmm.
And when you look at children's, let's say, behaviors, and you notice, okay, there's something that's not right. If everything's right, the tree is working well. But if you notice, for example, that there's difficulty in the movement, how they move their bodies, yeah. Let's say when they jump, they're really stiff, they're holding the knees tight, or when they run, it looks a little bit robotic. Then you're realizing, wow, the way this child has their muscular movements is not smooth. Then you look at input, integration, and output. The problem that this child at this moment has, and it's always temporary, is in the output. It's in how the child responds to the world, in this case with movement. Yeah.
Hmm. And what would be some examples of input, like for a student?
Thanks. Yeah, input is often shows up in attention problems or focus problems. It can also show up in behavior. Behavior can show up in all three, but it's different types of behavior. And the way you can imagine it or think about it is, if there's problems with the input, that means there are things coming from the world through the senses. I'm hearing something, I'm seeing something, I'm feeling something, I'm tasting something. Yeah. And that's coming in, but I'm not getting the right picture. So, in other words, if I'm hearing something outside, the kids are playing in the pool right now, and and you are talking to me, Erin, yeah,
Mhm.
the minute you're talking, I don't hear the kids anymore. They totally get to the
Right.
background and I can totally listen to you. That means my input is perfect in that moment. I'm getting what I need in, and what I don't need, I'm leaving out. But if there's a problem, this child will probably hear everything at the same time. It'll hear the car over there, it'll hear the bird, it'll hear the kids, it'll hear you, it'll even hear its own body movement, you know, what, shuffling or something, as loud as everything else is.
Mhm.
And somebody says to that child, listen to me. And the child is saying, oh my goodness, you know, what sound am I supposed to listen to?
Right.
And how am I going to get my brain to do that, right? Then there's something wrong in the input. And
I
it
love the
can
image
feel,
you
yeah,
gave
go
me
ahead.
once, the image of a student, you know, basically in this bathtub of input, of sensory input, and they just kind of reach in, they don't know, and they just grab something, and that's what they're going to pay attention to. But it might be what you want them to pay attention to, but it might not. So all the, you know, basically everything is having the equal, um, you know, priority in the brain for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
And what happens to that is a complete overwhelm, happens really fast.
Hmm.
It's a little bit, and thank you for bringing it up that way, because I can say what I just wanted to say in a better way. So what comes because of that is, you can imagine yourself being in a birthday party, children's birthday party, all day, and there's kids and there's music and you're handling stuff, and then you come home, there's a movie playing and somebody's talking to you, and then the phone rings and they ask you something. That's how those kids feel every day.
Hmm.
They're in constant overwhelm.
Hmm.
And now you can imagine that type of frustration would lead to two things, one of two things. Either withdrawal, they completely withdraw from the world, they just don't want anything to know to do, don't want anything to do with the world. Most of the time, though, it's the other one, and it's they get aggressive or disruptive. Yeah. And I'm going to say something later why these things actually help them
Hmm.
to try to reset their brain. And once you know that, you can give them other ways to reset their brain if you know the problem is in the input. And
Hmm.
then, you know, all of a sudden they start hearing you.
Hmm. Well, maybe we can talk about that now. So, like, um, what sorts of things? So, you're talking about if they're having difficulty with the input, what are some of the things that they might do to try to soothe themselves already, like they might just naturally do, that might not be the most effective? And what are some of the things that we can do with them to actually help them integrate that? Because, like, in my
Yeah.
classroom, you introduced a lot of really simple things that were actually therapeutic. So they were actually not just soothing them in the moment, but actually helping them integrate
Yeah.
input.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing. The things that are soothing or that are helping are most of the time also actually helping the brain to develop more and deeper, so that those issues actually become less or go away altogether. Yeah. And what you can do is, there are a few things we can do. And it's kind of nice if we know a little bit of what we're looking at in this whole scenario. So if I may, I would like to point out the three areas real quick and
Hmm.
how they look,
Hmm.
and then go into the remedy. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the first one I already mentioned is the input, and it creates overwhelm. The second one, when you are in the tree and where the branches are being built, and it's basically the integration is not working well, you can look at it as if the communication in the brain is not accurate. So if we have input into the brain and then we have drawers where all that input goes in, imagine it's all drawers and file cabinets and they get all put in there in the right place. Then we can later create a good output. If somebody says you need a jump, you put open the drawers, pull open the drawers that you need for jumping, and then your muscles will jump nicely, right?
Hmm.
So if in that area there is, let's say, a lack of growth, yeah, they're a little bit behind in that area, you need to know that that's happening, because then you can actually address it, and that counts for every area. If you know that that area is behind, you can address it with those therapeutic tools, can help the child remedy it, but also grow out of it. Yeah. And so that's why it's important to recognize that. And that area, how it looks is, it's oftentimes coordination. Kids have a difficulty coordinating. They will use their right hand to pick up something in front of them that's on the right side of their body, and they will use the left hand that's on the left side because they avoid going over the middle line. Yeah. If they go over the middle line, both right and left hemisphere need to work together and talk together, and that's hard. So you'll see it at that. You'll also see that they often change sometimes their preferred hands. And you also see it in, for example, rhythm. Yeah, they have difficulty with rhythm. They have difficulty with jumping. Jumping can also be difficult in the output, but it's the rhythm specifically that you'll look for. Okay. And then the third area I've mentioned a little bit is the motoric, is the output, either emotionally, mentally, or motorically. Often we see it motorically. So if there's stiffness, or if the kids are like that, they can't hold their head up, or they're laying down.
Yeah.
What's happening through that is the overwhelm is happening in the muscular structure, and really the body is the attention of the brain is on the body in order to hold the body upright, or hold it in position, or walk or move the body. In other words, there's a big part of their brain being used for normal movement that's normally supposed to be in the subconscious mind.
Like
And that's why
it should be automatic, right? There should be
Yeah.
connections in your brain that just make it where you don't have to use effort.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it should be automatic. And if it's not automated, then those kids don't have the attention span, because the half of the brain or even more is occupied with keeping the body upright, right? And so it does help them, when they can lay down, because they can relax that. But there are other ways that help them better. So those are the three areas. Now, the fourth area that I haven't talked about yet in EFL is the practical level. So if the child has difficulty in a practical level, for example, hammering and nailing, or creating a tower and building high, yeah, or assembling something, then all areas are in a way not working well together. Yeah, then you would look for which area is most obvious. Are they more sensitive to sound, more sensitive to touch? Is that really important? Is that really prevalent? Or is it more the coordination? Or is it more the motoric output? And that is where it started. And you still go to that area then, okay? So that's basically the background. Now, in terms of what we do, Erin, is that what you asked?
Yeah, please.
So what you do when the child has difficulty with sensory input, you want to help them get out of the overwhelm and really shut down, reset the brain. And when the brain is reset, they have more attention span until the brain gets overwhelmed again. And you also want to help that overwhelm to be diminished, yeah, a little bit, what's the word?
Kind of like muted or tone, just kind of turn it down a little bit.
Tone down. Tone down. Thank you. And so the way you do that is with strong touch, like this, and I'll say something how that can happen. It's not necessary that we need to touch the children, we can, but it's not soft touch that activates a lot. It's actually like a massage type touch.
Yeah, deep. Yeah.
Or it's strong movement on the joints, which happens often in jumping. Or it's the equilibrium, if the equilibrium gets activated. Yeah. Those three areas, those three aspects, they calm down the brain and reset the brain. The
Mm,
best one I always say is the trampoline because it has all three. It
mm,
has, strong compression on the joints, and it has involves the equilibrium.
mhm.
I'm German, so you can tell. and and it also gives strong pressure on, they go on their butts and they go on their knees, and
Mhm,
they get strong pressure on the body.
mhm.
And within 5 minutes, their brain is reset.
Mm,
And that's a good tool for the parents. If
mm.
you have a sensitive child, or if they have a sensitive child, to really get a trampoline, and a
Yeah,
big
and
one.
we even had a small one in the classroom that we use, and I
Do you
know,
want to share a little bit how
yeah,
that worked?
Nurani has a little one outside of her classroom too that she uses. We'll use it like even for spelling or something, or I'll give them math facts and they have to jump their math facts. So it gives everybody in the class like a movement break, but especially gives those students that need that reset. Or, if I see one student that needs a reset, and I'll give them that opportunity to do that. You've also shared with me, and with parents I know that with the students that we worked with, to have them do it first thing in the morning as a way to start the
Yeah,
day, to do it right before bed, which you wouldn't think that activation, that seems like, oh gosh, we're going to get them all riled up, but that can actually help reset. Like
big
um,
time.
a lot of times these children have trouble falling asleep and they need
Yeah,
that pressure and
yeah.
that input to
Release.
release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that those kids often have, because they can get really overwhelming for the parents, and they get disruptive, and the reason why they get disruptive is if they yell loud,
Mm,
then that loud yell that actually helps them for a moment to not hear all the other things.
right.
Or if they bump against somebody or something, that strong pressure resets the brain. Yeah. So that's why they're often looking for input, yeah, to help them reset the brain.
Mhm.
But because they're so overwhelming, they often get put in front of a screen to calm them down. Now,
Mhm.
the screen will add to the overwhelm so tremendously. So those kids, for them, it's actually poison to be
Yeah.
in front of a screen, and the parents notice that after the screen, it's worse.
Yeah,
And what I do, yeah,
interesting that you mentioned that because one of the students that we've worked with that I worked with over these last couple months, and obviously everything was through a screen. I absolutely noticed it affected that student so much more. It was so much worse. I mean, he just absolutely he admitted at the end that he just hated our Zoom sessions because that was just it just created more overwhelm for him than
yeah,
which was already very high for him. One
yeah.
question that came
And
up.
so, can I quickly add,
Sure,
Erin, because
sure.
at that point, the trampoline, thank you, is so important. So
Mm,
I already tell, and this is a good trick for the parents, I think. If the kids get to see a movie, I tell them beforehand, before they get the movie, or ask them, are you going to jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes after the movie? If yes, you get to see the movie. If not, cannot do the movie because
mhm,
your brain needs it.
mhm,
And if it's before the movie, every child will agree. And then afterwards, you just, make sure it happens.
mhm,
But you can't ask them after the movie. Then
mhm,
don't,
mhm.
yeah.
Right.
But so if they do that after the movie, it works wonders.
To
It's
create
really
that
amazing.
balance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, how long would that reset last? So you're saying, okay, if they
Good.
jump on the trampoline
Good
for five
question.
minutes, it gives them that reset. Maybe it depends on the child, but what
Yeah.
would you say?
So that's a really good question. It depends on the level of integration. The more that's done, the longer it'll last, because the trampoline itself helps the child to actually create mm, um, these connections in the brain that are needed
Mhm,
for the sensory input to be better.
mhm.
Yeah,
That's what.
because they're constantly getting a sensory input.
Mhm,
And there are other things that you can do. For example, you can put them in a hammock. Erin will tell us about a hammock. Or you can play a game where you roll them into a yoga mat, yeah, and roll them, or I sometimes hold them on the feet and let them walk on their hands. Those are things that reset, even in the classroom,
mhm,
and that actually help the brain to develop. And
mm,
the longer and the more they do that, especially if they're in the classroom, they get it every day. It'll go so fast within, sometimes 2 months. or
Yeah.
1 month,
Yeah.
you see that they grown out of a problem.
Yes.
Because in occupational therapy we would do it once a week,
Yeah.
and within half a year most of the problems were
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. 6 months, you see a total turnaround. I would say that, and that's what's really beautiful about it is that it's not something you need to just do with that one child. There are things that are fun that every
Yeah,
child wants to do, and that are good for everybody. They're good for
yeah,
everybody's brain. And it's not only addressing whatever the issue is, it's also just generally helping long term to create those connections and create, better connections and more strength.
yeah. And the why I like the trampoline, or even the ball, for kids to sit on a ball, if you can create good structure around it. And I want to hear from Erin, because she has really perfected that, to use it in the classroom. Why I like that, it helps the kids that are in the first range, where the roots are needing support, but it also helps the kids with the output, because the bodies always move. And the kids that have problems with the output, they need the movement in order for the tension in the muscles to maintain themselves automatically. So they need an increase in muscle tension so that they can be focused. And that muscle tension increases when they move, or right after they move, right? And so a hammock or a ball, or sessions on a trampoline where you do math or spelling or any kind of games, where they need to walk or jump over a trampoline, and
Mhm.
maybe go by some balancing tool,
Yeah.
that helps them, that their brain stays focused, because the body is not going in this reset mode where it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
constantly trying to stay up.
you gave me a beautiful visual or example is, if a child is struggling with output and they're laying on the ground, and then you ask them to sit up and then you want to teach them a math lesson, 80%, right, or something of their brain is preoccupied with just the physical act of sitting up. So that only
Yeah,
gives them like 20% for math or anything else.
yeah,
And so if you can give them the opportunity to get that, output, strengthen that output, strengthen their muscles, give their muscles that input in that way, then their brains can be more available for learning.
that's right. And even the laying down itself is a remedy,
Hmm.
because the blood changes, the pressure on the body changes, and they
Interesting.
often will also try to go upside down. So when you see them do all kinds of things, and being in different positions, it's good to be able to allow that.
Yeah.
And also notice, wait a minute, I need to get that child to move. I need to pick up his feet or her feet. I need to let him walk on his hands over there to the next book to pick that up,
Hmm.
instead of having him walk normally. Yeah, or have that trampoline in the middle, or have them read the book in the hammock, because they are asking for movement right now.
Yeah. That's what I love about everything that you've shared with us is that it's good for everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
it helps you kind of see what children are doing differently. It helps you have a different frame, like, oh, when they're bumping into each other, they're hanging upside down, they're not misbehaving. They're actually, it's very intelligent in a way. It's someone mentioned
Yeah.
earlier how Swami said that energy has its own intelligence. And they do.
Mm-hmm.
They know what their brains need to develop. Like, oh, I don't, I mean, they don't think about it the way we're talking about it, but intuitively they know what they need. And just to have that perspective as teachers is really helpful in, just working with it rather than working against it, right?
Yeah, and you'll notice that even so-called ADD, or coordination problems, they actually subside significantly, and kids start to be able to even meditate for a moment,
Hmm.
because they're fed, their body gets what it needs, and then they can actually function.
Yeah. Well, it is 8 o'clock. That went by like that. And we could definitely go for another 30 minutes, I'm sure. But I do
Mhm.
want to honor the time. So I'm just going to go to the questions. And then maybe also, if people want, I can talk a little bit about how I did some of these things
Yeah.
in the classroom. You and I can talk a little bit about that. Um,
Uh-huh.
but someone asked, and I think the answer, well, would activities like swinging on swings or ropes help? And I think the answer is
Yeah.
yes, because we had hammocks. We put up hammocks in my classroom, and that's basically a swing. And you, do you want to talk a little bit about what the equilibrium, what that does?
Yeah, thank you. So that helps very much, and it's really amazing if you have that available because every brain needs it until the age of 9 or so. They need it constantly. Later, it's actually really good too for teenagers, but for a different reason because they need a reset. But for the developing brain, it's really important to have that. Now, the interesting part about that swings and rope swings is that the kids who need it most, they will not use them
Mm-hmm.
because they're so sensitive, hypersensitive, and they get dizzy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see them sitting around and they really need it. And that's where the hammock comes in really handy because remember in the beginning I said there are these factors that inhibit the overwhelm. And one factor that inhibits is strong pressure, right? So while the equilibrium inhibits to a degree, it doesn't inhibit, sorry, it resets the brain, it doesn't inhibit the overwhelm. So
Mm-hmm.
if you need to reset, you can use just the trampoline and the swing and all of that, it's perfect. But for a child that has an overwhelm going, that needs to be reset because of the overwhelm, you need to do something where there's pressure involved. And the trampoline itself has that pressure on the feet, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but the hammock is the best for a really hypersensitive child because if you hang up the hammock like so, this is the instead of hanging it up like this, you hang it up like that.
Mm-hmm.
Here, so these two hooks they come together, and
Mm-hmm.
then it looks like a little cocoon, and then they sit in that and they swing in that. They can actually tolerate it, and it's hung up really low so that the feet touch the ground and they are in constant control
Mm-hmm.
about it, and the pressure helps them. And if they do that and they enjoy it, then they will do it more, and eventually they'll end up on the swing. And
Mm-hmm.
when they end up on the swing, you know you're halfway there because now their brain integrates normally. The problem why they didn't integrate so far is that they try to avoid the hyperstimulation, and that's why the brain didn't develop well. So
Mm-hmm.
we need to find ways to help them stimulate and yet reset at the same time
Mm-hmm.
so that they have a joyful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have tips to suggest for adults with the same issues who probably can't all jump on a trampoline or anything or
Yeah.
things like that?
Yeah. So it's really good to get regular massages. It's good to be laying on the floor, often maybe even rolling on the floor, a little bit. Or they do enjoy pressure on them. So if you lay them on the floor, lay themselves on the floor, and they get really heavy, heavy pillows and blankets on them, like filled with sand pillows,
Mm-hmm.
that's really good. I do encourage jumping on the jump, but not jumping. You use the trampoline without getting the tippy toes of your feet up. So you're just doing this, and the feet are staying on the trampoline. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the hammock can be good. So basically, the same tools, just in an adult way. And I would say probably number one tool will be meditation and massage.
Great. That's wonderful. We had never talked about that. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, is a trampoline good for kids 11 years old with ADHD?
Oh, perfect. Couldn't
Yeah,
be better.
yeah.
It couldn't be better. Now you want to get them to want to do it.
Mm,
And that's a tricky thing because the attention is, they want something different all the time. So how I like to do that is I like to bring a balloon in. So bring a balloon in the trampoline, or I go myself on the trampoline and then they want to come. And then they're jumping about 2 minutes later. I can tell they're coming off. I'm going to throw a balloon in, right? And now they're kicking the balloon around, right? And the next thing that's happening, I'm putting some music on. Oops, and now they're going with the music. So you want to give a little bit of input so that they stay interested.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some ADD kids, all of them are hypersensitive. So some of them are so hypersensitive that they're having the hardest time to just even walk on a trampoline. They feel so wobbly. And you can imagine how it feels if you think of yourself going on, you're on rollerblades and you're supposed to walk downstairs and you're blindfolded. So, there's
Yeah.
no security. Everything is like really
There's
wobbly.
a lot of anxiety there. I know.
Yeah, what you do there is you start with them laying on the trampoline, putting maybe a big ball, these really big gymnastic balls, and push down on them with that ball and have that feeling of strong touch on them, and the trampoline gives in. It's very soothing, and it
Mm,
starts to be really trusting.
mm,
It's an experience that creates trust, and it's very enjoyable.
mm.
And then more and more, you move them as long as they can handle. With that added pressure, they will be able to handle more movement, and then they're integrating because now the equilibrium is integrating. Yeah,
Mhm.
they will be so thankful because you're really feeding them what they need.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ria. We're just
Hmm.
gonna pause for a moment and I think I'll invite everyone to turn their video on and we can just keep talking. If you have a few more minutes, would that be okay?
Sure. Uh-huh.
Okay. And maybe I can share a little bit too from my classroom how I brought some of these. We
Yeah,
talked a little bit
please.
about them.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh. How you put the rules up for the hammock, for example,
yeah.
is kind of
Yeah, or
important.
whatever other questions people have too. So I just want to honor that if anybody needs to go, don't feel like you have to sneak out or anything. But yeah, so Aria talked about a couple things that we actually brought into my classroom. So the hammocks, we set up two hammocks that were in that tight U shape with the both ends attached. And I fortunately have a loft that we just tied it to that. But Nurani has put one up in her classroom and just had a strong
Mhm.
screw there. Um, and so they use that during reading time, mostly during our silent reading time. But there might be other times. The first class that I had where we got really comfortable with it and they were really able to work with it well. Well, we had a full school year basically, unlike this year
Uh-huh.
where towards the end of the year they could choose where they wanted to work, and that could be a place to work certain times during the day. So when I set it up, it was yeah, I just introduced it to them like these are the safe ways to be in this space, and if you are unsafe, you have to choose something else. And they all wanted it so bad that they would do it, they did really well with it. I didn't really have issues, but if people have questions about that, I'm happy to go into it more. We also brought in
Mhm.
big yoga balls. By now, I
Mhm.
think I have four of them in there. I don't know how I managed to keep them all in the classroom. But so that's an option for students to sit on. Sometimes if we're sitting at the desks doing math or something like that, and it's great for heavy energy. Like if you just see someone kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, you know, they,
That's a good thing too, because some kids, they have too little input, so they're hyposensitive. You see that they're often a little bit obese. They don't ever want to do anything. Their appears they're really heavy,
mm-hmm,
and what it is that they're getting such little input while they're sitting that their brain falls asleep.
mm-hmm.
And so you need to wake them up, and being on a ball or in any kind of movement helps them with that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that was another thing where, when I introduced it, I showed them the like couple different ways they could sit, make sure you keep your feet on the floor to be safe. Um, and give everyone like a 5-second turn or something just to try it out the first time. And
Mhm.
there were some times where they were doing some wacky stuff on it, just because again, like I was saying, like they're just naturally their bodies are trying to put themselves in a position that feeds their brain, and sometimes that can
Mhm.
can get might be unsafe. They don't realize where they are in space sometimes, and that can be dangerous. So, but and then what was the other thing? We had the trampoline, the bean bath. So
Oh yeah.
having like a Tupperware container, like a big Tupperware, maybe a couple feet,
Big
couple
thing.
feet, yeah,
Uh-huh.
or you can get a bigger one, and filling it with dried beans, and having students put their hands into that. gives
And
them,
you can hide things in there that they need,
yeah.
cards or something you want them to pull out, helps them with that input.
Mhm. Yeah, so we would put like the math cards in there or, spelling
Uh-huh.
words in there or different things like that, and they'd have to dig in. And everyone loves it. But again, I did see, just like you said, the students that needed it the most, that would benefit most from it, were the most like, okay, I got it. They take the one on the
Yeah,
top and try not to touch any of the beams. So I actually came
yeah,
up with a, okay, you have to put your hands in for 10 seconds or something and then take one out, or and everybody had to do that, so I didn't just do that to that one person,
yeah,
but then it helped that person get a little bit at least from that.
yeah. And there you can also have them clap the hands,
Right.
create pressure before they do that, and then it's inhibited. Then they can actually go in and
Then it's
enjoy
not
it.
it's not like hypersensitive. Once you do that, it kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Hmm.
Are there other questions, or what else did we forget anything?
I
Or-
think I saw somebody asking what do
oh,
you do with kids that are tiptoeing?
yeah.
Yeah. So if you see a kid that tiptoes, the problem is in the motoric output. So they're often it's still remaining reflexes, but the way I handle it, that's my choice to handle the remaining reflexes is I go straight to the motoric output, and I help them with the motoric output by balancing. So we would walk with them, create a parkour that they have to balance. So, for example, you do a history session and you find maybe a symbol, and you find the person that belongs to that symbol. Or you do a math session, you find one number and you have the results in the other part of the room. And then you go to that part, let them go to that part of the room and then walk the parkour with that card back to the next part. And you do that often enough, they will have to put their heels down and they learn to walk in a different way, and it helps with the reflexes. Narani has amazing ways of how to work with remaining reflexes, with persisting reflexes, which is really wonderful also.
So
So those are the two ways you could work
will
with
you
that.
will you talk just briefly about, for those that might not know, what are those? What are you talking about when you talk about remaining reflexes?
Oh, okay. Um, well, it's when a child has certain, I think it's probably not directly related to what we're saying, but it's a way of interpreting what's going on in the brain, understanding that there are still some reflexes that they normally have as a little child and that go away, and
Hmm.
they haven't moved away. But I would still, as I mentioned, address it from that tree perspective,
Hmm.
because it's more fun.
Yeah.
And when the kids have fun, their brain integrates so much faster, and all these reflexes go away. So there is a way of dealing with the reflexes if there's some real problem, but you will find out if your child has that. But I prefer to work directly with the tree, because you want to create this fun experience for them where they love it, and they start to love movement. I had this one child that did not want to move, in your class, and he didn't want to do anything, not go on a trampoline, nothing. And in the end, he came, he ran, and he grabbed everything we had in the room and created a parkour with every single thing in the room, and used that parkour until the class was over. And that showed me, he was integrating, he was getting the input his brain had needed all along, but he didn't have enough inhibiting factors that would help him be comfortable enough, so he could never do it.
Hmm.
But the more we did these inhibiting factors of trampoline, I had him on a trampoline and I pushed a big gymnastic ball into him that he had to kick back. So not only was he on the trampoline, he also got this big ball onto him and he had to kick it back. So he got super big input, which helped him to be comfortable on the trampoline because that pressure was so strong. And then he loved it so much. So
Yeah.
that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I will just say, all of these things that we worked with these students allowed them to make tremendous gains in their other skills in the classroom. Their
Yeah,
reading,
yeah,
their writing, their communication, their social interaction, everything. I mean, it affected them, their whole being. So
yeah,
it's just really powerful, and only in a very short time, less than a year. So in just 6 months to do that
yeah.
on a regular basis. So,
And it's really nice to know that, for example, when kids are not good at writing, yeah, like the hand motoric isn't good, or they're not good at reading, or not good at calculating, if you actually look back into the physical body development and look where was that skill originally developed, and you work with that, one, they are way faster in progressing, and
mhm.
they have fun progressing. So you don't create this feeling of like you have them write and write and write and they end up hating to write. You don't have that,
Mm,
because you notice, okay, this is fine motoric, that's output, will create the better output. Or you have a child not being able to talk well or to understand things well, you know, it's in the tree itself, it's in the communication with the brain. So you work with that. Or you have a child where you notice they can calculate well, well then you need to see what's happening. And when you look at their sensory input, you see they're hypersensitive, then you know their map of their body wasn't created well, because through the number one, the roots, a body map is created. And if they have a body map, they understand direction, they understand sequence, they understand up and down, and that's what you need for math. But if they don't have that, you can train them in math forever. It's going to be so frustrating. But if you help them have fun with their physical body, and then they love it, and then they can all of a sudden work with math,
mhm,
then you have win 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 on all levels. Yeah. And it's very easy. Those tools are quite simple.
mhm. Um, Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ariya.
So much, yeah. We could talk much more, but
I
let's see if
know.
there's one more question
Yeah,
that's really
and
burning.
like I said, if people, go through their day and they think of other questions, feel free to email them and we can make sure we get them to you and get answers if people think of things later. Someone asked, do you use weighted jackets?
Yeah, that's good. It's good for that reason. But they need to be taken off again and put back on regularly, because the brain adjusts to the weight and then the weight becomes normal and then there's no input anymore.
Hmm.
So
Okay,
that's
that's
helpful.
helpful. Yeah. And then someone asked if you have a website that you could share.
Huh. Unfortunately not.
Okay, that's okay. Maybe I'll connect you. There's someone messaged me privately, so maybe I'll help connect you to if that is trying to happen.
Yeah.
She wants to
And
connect.
then if you want to understand more about this sensory integration, Jane Ayers
Okay.
is the author. I highly recommend checking some things out, but all, and she's very, very intricate. So there's lots of information there, and use your guidance as what you need really. But mainly connect to what you just heard, connect to sensory integration and sensory integration therapy, and allow that to come into you from the divine. The information you need about the sensory integration for these children that you're working with, when you ask for that, then you're, of course, becoming so what is it called, open, yeah,
Yeah.
to receive the information there. And it totally comes down where our attention goes, the energy goes, and where the energy goes, it flows. So
Mm,
we can actually work that way with a little bit of information
mhm.
and create magic with our guidance.
Draw on our intuition, absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, I'll recommend another book. I don't know if you ever have read this, the book Smart Moves by Carl.
Uh-huh.
I forget what her name is. I'll put it up, make sure it's on the website. I think some of our Ananda teachers have heard of it. She worked with Brain Gym specifically, but her book gives a wonderful explanation of some of what you were talking about. Where did some of these later skills originate? So,
Yeah,
the reading
that's good.
skills. She goes into even in the womb, how are your eyes developing? How are your senses developing that later lead to these skills? And it's really I found it very fascinating and gives a lot of perspective. So Wonderful. Well, thank you,
Oh, thank
everybody.
you so much. Thanks, Erin. I'm so happy to be able to share some of that and to see how it worked in your classroom was really wonderful.
Very fun. And yeah, we welcome any questions if others come up. Yes, thank you. Carla Hannaford wrote it. Yes, thank you, Bart.
Oh, okay. That's great.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it is a great book. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Have
Okay,
a good
lots of love. I'll see you tomorrow.
day. Sounds good. Bright and early, right?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. Wonderful. Have
Yeah,
a good rest
lots
of
of
your
love to
day.
everyone.
Thanks for
So
joining us.
grateful to the school and EFL.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
Oh, so grateful.
Okay. Bye,
Aloha.
everyone.